we go into our next very valuable, interesting speech by a very valuable person, because we have the topic about future challenges. How can science help the future challenges? I have the great pleasure to welcome on stage the co-chair of the International Resource Panel, a scientist with an open heart, a visionary intellectual, and an all-around gentleman. Please welcome Janez Potočnik. Welcome.
Lea, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank for the invitation. I'm really pleased. By the way, I have already tweeted on #Syke20. The story which I would like to tell you, it's quite long, so I will a bit rush. When we hear sustainable, circular, green, resource efficient, what we actually talk about, and we don't dare to say. We talk about the absolute necessity that we change the way we produce, the way we consume, and the way we live. And when we talk about sustainability, we don't talk normally about sustainability which is connected to the environment, but we talk about sustainability in all our areas. If you want examples of unsustainable behavior, economic, financial crisis, social, next year, 91% of human population will have more wealth than the rest of 99. Environmental climate change. And if something is true for today, and I'm, by the way, a PhD economist, economy, it's absolutely ignoring the limits, ignoring the laws of physics. And we are living in a clear denial of reality. Facts we basically try to ignore. Population growth. You have all heard that we are now 7. According to the latest estimates, we will be 9.5 till 2050, or 9.6. What does that mean? We all got used to those figures, which is not too good. What does actually that mean? It means that in less than one generation on the planet will be additionally more people than it was at the beginning of the 20th century, the total amount of population. So we are moving really fast. Or if you want, additional Finland in less than a month. My country in 9 days and 6 hours. That's how quick the things are happening. Per capita consumption growth in those areas which are today where the poverty is still very much located. McKinsey is estimating 3 additional billion consumers to the middle class consumption from poverty. And the doubling story, if you want to calculate anything, how quick it's doubling, then you have to divide 70 by the growth rate. So if the growth rate is 1, something is doubling in 70 years. In China today, there is as much population than it was on the globe at the beginning of 20th century, 100 years ago. And they were growing between 7 and 10 still recently. So just imagine how fast the things are happening there. And yet, we have limited resources: fresh water, oceans, land and soil, clean air, raw materials, biodiversity, ecosystems, fuel. And already today, 60% of ecosystems are degraded or used unsustainable. So the conclusion here is relatively simple. We have to change the way we produce and consume. Otherwise, we will hit the wall. But these are the arguments which people tend to ignore. They tend to listen more to economic arguments. Let me give you the economy of the change. First, we are living in Europe in a resource-intensive economies where industrial revolution started. There are a lot of lock-ins. Lock-in in our structure of economy, lock-in in our infrastructure, in business models, in financial models. Second, change of resource price trends and increased price volatility. This is the trend of resource prices, composite, till in the previous century. And that's what's happening in the last 10 years. We call it a hockey stick. We see the last year, or better to say, the last 3 months, not anymore, that there was a decrease of the oil prices. Don't believe too much in that. still 85% of European companies are expecting resource prices to increase in the next 5 years. Next, cost structure of manufacturing sector. Already today, you can devote costs basically on two, if I simplify, labor costs and resource cost. In German industry, labor costs are 18%, resource cost 43%. And finally, Europe is absolutely import dependent. We import more than 60% of energy. Majority of the materials which are inbuilt in high-tech products are imported. So if we want to keep really industry in Europe, the only recipe is to produce the products which use less energy, less water, less raw materials, reuse, refurbish, recycle. That's the way we should go. We can do much better. I will tell you why I have reasons for optimism. Inefficiencies which are around us. Turning coal into light is still only 3% efficient. Only 15% of the energy we put in our petrol tanks is used to move the car down the road. 80% of what we produce is used once and then discarded. Only 1% of the valuable rare earth that we use in products are recycled at the end of the product life. And the ultimate inefficiency, 80% of resources we use are used by only 20% of the Earth population. Two examples from your life. One is the mobile phone. You can produce the wedding ring by using 10 tons of gold ore or 10 kilos of recycled mobile phones. Yet, less than 10% is today in Europe recycled. In EU, more than 100 million in each year is in the drawer staying, which means 2.4 tons of gold, 25 tons of silver, 1 ton of palladium, 900 tons of copper. Just ask yourself how many you keep in your drawers, and you will find the answer. This is something which was produced by our International Resource Panel. In red, you have the metals which we are recycling less than 1%. In green, more than 50%. I will, of course, not go into detail, but just that you would get the picture where we are currently standing. But it's not everything about recycling. Let's use the second example. That's our car. We have already learned that 85% of the energy in combustion engine is lost for nothing today. But even if we would go to the ultimate efficiency there, it would not give us the proper answer. That's why we are going in the direction of new technologies. You have here the electric Tesla car, but even if you own the electric Tesla car, this is, by the way, the picture from the commission, the road passing the commission. So 96% of the time, the cars which we own are parked. When we drive, 3% we are standing in congestion, and normally is that 1 to 2 passengers are in the car. By the way, the car was invented that we would be mobile, not that it would make our house look nice. So if you want to have the solution, you have to look in the whole cycle. And that's why this picture is basically telling you the logic of the circularity. So in the circularity, there are more circles. First, maintenance, reuse, redistribute, refurbish, recycle, energy recovery, and finally, landfill. And you have it in biological and technical materials. In biological, it's more natural because farmers have to follow the rules of the nature, while in technological, it's not so natural still. But this is basically how one would need to organize itself. Role of the markets. Some are saying that the markets will, of course, deliver all the proper answers. Markets are powerful. And markets are the thing which we will have to live also in the future. But markets cannot ensure efficiency and allocation of use of resources if prices do not reflect the true value and costs of resources, and they do not. If rewards to capital are disproportionate to other inputs, and they are. If managers on annual contracts are induced to make short-term investment decisions overly influenced by bonuses based on short-term share prices, and that is happening, and I could continue with the ifs. So, are the markets and regulation compatible? If you want another global game which is going around, that's the football, then ask the best football players, do they want to have a good referee and clear rules of the game? Their answer is, of course, yes. Why? Because only if you have clear regulation on the field, then the best players are really the best players. Otherwise, you have the chaos. And who is prevailing? The most aggressive. And that is unfortunately happening today still on many of our markets. Innovation, it's a really powerful tool, but we need to send innovation into right direction. So incentives and political messages are crucial for innovation. Product, if you design the product in the right way, then you can hope that it will finish in the right way. If it's designed wrongly, then if you cannot replace the battery in mobile phone, you cannot recycle it. So we have to think from the beginning when the product is done. Consumers are enormous power, but today 50% of consumers do not believe anymore to the eco labels. Why? Because we have more than 400. And if you cannot decide fast in 3 seconds when you are buying, then of course you don't believe. And finally, of course, business models are really important. In many cases, it's not necessarily that you own the thing, but you can, because the important thing is that you use it. So sharing the things and so on will be basically very much also leasing will be very much the future business models. Yes, it's a lot about eco-industries. They are important, but in essence, the whole economy has to change. What is happening internationally now, it's a real revolution, which we are underestimating. The transformative agenda, new global agreement based on new normal, where poverty eradication and sustainability would be joined, is now going on in the discussions under the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I will not go into detail because I don't have the time, but I can tell you that we should take this process much, much more seriously, because it's much more connected to the developed part of the world than is actually connected to the developing part of the world. Of course, climate energy is also part which we should not ignore. And European Union. We should learn that responding to financial crisis, it's yes, necessary, but it's absolutely not sufficient condition to improve our competitiveness. We are ignoring still that the world is facing globalization. We are part of that globalization, which is restructuring the relations. Multipolarity is out there, and Europe has to find its place in new division of the work which is globally happening. That's why circular economics in that is so important. Our answers are not always appropriate. For example, I do remember that we were very much focusing when we were seeing the problems on energy price rather than on energy efficiency. We wanted energy price to move it lower, but if the longer trends are telling you that we will be still import dependent when it comes, that we will always have, for example, the estimates are that in 2035, the energy price in Europe will still be much higher than actually in the United States, or if we compare to China, much more. If you are dependent, if this is your weak point, then your strength point should be energy efficiency, and your focus should basically go there. International credibility can only be gained by adequate domestic policies, and that's why it's so important that in Europe we stay on the right course and that we do not ask ourselves constantly the questions, are we faster than the others? By the way, if the things will evolve in New York like they are evolving, we should really be worried that we will not become at a certain moment a follower. This is really an interesting picture. It's showing you the expected growth rate in the next year. So here you have Europe and Japan, around 1%, and the quickest is, of course, Africa and Asia. As you know, in Europe, I lived in the Commission, which has 10 years promoted growth and jobs. The new Commission has really changed the narrative to jobs and growth. But where is the essence of the real problem, which we don't dare yet to answer? We are constantly connecting growth and jobs, which means that we need to grow high if we want to solve our unemployment. what will happen if we will not grow high? Are we ready to have high unemployment? I think that we should really focus also on the questions which are connected to redistribution of the wealth which we have. Because it is likely that the saturated economies which you are seeing, import-dependent economies and vulnerable economies as we are, will be facing a period of relatively low growth rates, if any. And since we have achieved already the high level, I think we have to be quite happy. You know, I have many times said, what would you prefer? To increase, to have a growth 1% from 1,000 or to have 10% from 100? Both are getting exactly 10 euros additionally. What would you like? 10 euros on 100 or 10 euros on 1,000? So that's the reality which we have to face. Let me now, in the last phase, go to the science policy interface. Science is about what is, studying, presenting, communicating the facts or evidence-based certainty. Policy is about what ought to be. And science for policy making, it's about presenting the options, reducing the scope of choices for achieving policy objectives in a kind of a democratic context. That is making us that we are moving slowly, steadily in the direction from disciplinary to multidisciplinary and to transdisciplinary. Transdisciplinary means not only multidisciplinary inside science, but also to other stakeholders of the community which democratically decides. So, science policy interface, the use of science, how we are seeing it today. We can grasp a lot already, if we wish, from internet. My kid is basically saying that he is tired to go to school because he learns nothing, because he can go to internet and learn that quickly without moving from his apartment 10 times faster and better than if he goes to school. That's the sometimes bitter reality which we are facing. Parents are sometimes in denial of the scientific truth out there. For example, vaccination against measles, we don't want to because we are afraid of the things, but we don't follow the science advice. Media is for big stories, not actually for the truth. Scientists are not always the best in presenting, not always on the time, and time span is not always the one which it's the best. Decision makers also are not innocent at all. So we basically want to use the part of science which fits to the results which we would like to present, which is not exactly how we would tend to understand how to use the science. And private interests, of course, I can talk lengthy there. There are a lot of lobbyists in Brussels, Helsinki, and other places around. And it's clearly that in many cases, it's also to basically present the part of the scientific work which fits into your story. That's the reality which we are living. I painted it a bit bitter, a bit dark intentionally, because it's on all of us to basically work on this science policy and interface better. If there is outside the inconvenient truth, and when it, for example, in the case of endocrine disruptors, we try to a bit hide behind. We need catalysts, we need interpreters, brokers. And for example, one of the typical brokers or interpreters, it's this function which was currently removed, science policy advisor in the Commission, but I will mention that a bit later. In Commission, we are really strong on impact assessments. They are really thorough, but if we are frank, many times it's not so based on science than it should be. So it's a lot of analytical work, but analytical work doesn't exactly mean that it's also based on scientific development. And one thing which I have learned, we are really simplifying when it comes to cost and benefits. We always take care of cost of introduction of something, where you can easily prove that it's costly, but you never put on the same weight the cost of doing nothing, which is many times much, much higher, but we don't show it. And finally, the landscape of divisions. We live in the landscape where we have divisions among disciplines, divisions among departments of universities, divisions among ministries, divisions among DGs. In EU, we tried to refocus and bring these social challenges into the center, and through the European innovation partnerships to reorganize that those divisions would be overcome. But even with good intentions, it's not always easy task that you transform the science into a proper policy making. Albert Einstein was once asked, how does he explain that we have developed atomic bomb, but we were not able in politics to stop the use of the atomic energy to destroying people? And his answer was, listen, my friend, the answer is very simple, because the politics is much more difficult than the physics. And that's unfortunately how the real life many times looks like. So in the science policy interface, currently it looks that it seems that the best way to attract attention and steer the debate of Brussels these days is to withdraw or scrap some initiatives, like it was the case of Chief Science Advisor and Circular Economy, which brought us to the fact that now Commission is considering proposal for establishing in a more structural way scientific advice for EU policy making, which is good, and also saying that a more comprehensive, broader proposal covering not only half, but the whole circle will be proposed, which is also good. And let's hope that they will be successful. Finally, when we look to the international policy needs science base, then we see that we have various bodies, from IPCC, EBS for biodiversity, and I'm co-chairing now the resource efficiency, the International Resource Panel. What is the advantage of the IPCC? It is international by nature and by definition. It is transdisciplinary. It is policy relevant, but not policy prescriptive. It goes for balance of evidence approach, which creates a critical mass of scientific knowledge, advice that policymakers cannot ignore. We are close also with the ERP, even if we haven't yet established so much direct influence on policy making. But the idea, of course, of our International Resource Panel is that from individual resources, we would shift to the system thinking, which is utmost needed. It's much, much more complex story than it's the story of the climate change, but not less important, believe me. So, to conclude, 21st century in which we are living is the century of fragility. We are much more interconnected than we were in the past, and we are much more vulnerable. And we cannot deliver the answers of a global dimension not recognizing that. So our responsibility, individual and collective, is today much, much bigger than it was just 30, 50 years ago. If it's there one thing where we could learn and we haven't yet learned, it's learning from the nature. Nature is the biggest system, circular system, millions of years of experiences, where nothing is lost. Each thing which is happening has its purpose. Us humans are supposed to be part of nature, but sometimes, unfortunately, we are still behaving as invasive species. Environmental protection, it's not an obstacle to economic growth, it's just the opposite. If you want to limit your economic development, just ignore it. And I can guarantee you that this is the best way how you can limit your development. Here are the countries' Eco-Innovation Index 2012. You will find that Finland is on the top, and also here the Global Competitiveness Index. And you can see that basically on both sides you have more or less the same countries on the top. Also here, if you see environmental regulation, so the strictest is on the right. And the countries which have the most strict environmental regulation are not the countries with low GDP per capita. On the contrary, you can say, yeah, because they can afford it. But I will answer you, yes, but that's not hampering their GDP per capita. They are still living well, and they afford it, and it's good. So living within ecosystem limits, you know, we have developed this three triangle system of social, economic, and environmental balance. In essence, systems like policy, values, technology, science, market, industry have to be built inside the whole story of the ecosystems. That's basically something which was developed by European Environmental Agency. It's not mine. And I think that that's a logic which we will have to follow if we want to go on the right path. Which are the main obstacles for change? First, human behavior. As individuals, we act totally differently in our family than we act publicly. In our family, we would give last euro for the health and for education of our kids and taking care for their future. When we come out there, we don't understand that our policy making, which we are doing out there, it's influencing to their future too. In a way, we prefer that we pocket the money and subsidize the same kids at home. And that's absolutely not the way how we should behave. Lack of long-term consistency, how to strengthen long-term strategic thinking and policy making and replace prevailing short-term logic. Name me the name of politician who was re-elected because he or she was thinking long-term. Focus on financial side of the economy. Budgetary deficit versus the structure, comparison between company and country. If you go in the morning in the company and you look in the eyes of financial director and ask him, do we have money for buying our new materials and paying the salaries, that company will not last long because it's not discussing about what are their future challenges and what is their development. The same is with the country and the financial ministry. If they deal constantly with budgetary deficits, instead they would deal with the budgetary structure, which is the major instrument for influencing the economic policy. That means that you simply don't do the policy in the right way. Protecting status quo, how to break lock-ins, and the logic of defending the lowest common denominator approach. It's also one of the vital questions. Governance and lack of implementation. I've heard many times in the Competitiveness Council my ministers being extremely bold ambitions and asking me for the ambition when we were talking about principles. When it came to concrete proposals, this ambition was vanishing, not to mention implementation. So it's really implementation which matters. Nothing else. All things which are written in the paper but not implemented doesn't really matter. And finally, how to break up the science mentality, how to make people understand that winning against somebody, like, for example, I have heard in the Commission many times that we have won against the people who are defending or who are making the policy in industrial policy. No, we are both losing. It's so important to understand that cooperation, integration of the policies is the real way ahead in the complexity of the world which we are living. So, change is simply unavoidable. As my friend Pavan Sukhdev said, we have to fix a broken compass. And science is the one which should lead us and show the way on that compass. So we should stop flipping the coin, because environment and economy are basically two sides of the same coin. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.